Audiobook. Abandoned by William Clark Russell. Chapter 10. Two Graves. Reynolds, greatly marvelling, followed his companion into the cave. After the necessary pause to accustom the sight to the interior gloom, Goodhart stepped to the old sea-chest, and, opening the lid, took from the bottom two thin bags united by a pair of shoulder-straps. He carried these bags, or satchels, to the mouth of the cave. Each bag was formed of a waterproof tissue, with a rope handle of silk connected with straps like a man's braces. It was easy to see that these satchels or bags had been made to wear on the back or chest. They were filled with folded documents. "These," said Goodhart, holding up the satchels, "represent all that I possess in the world outside of what I carry in my pockets. They contain the product of 35 years of hard labor." He hung the satchels by their straps over his arm, and extracted one of the documents, and, opening it, handed it with his delightful smile to Reynolds, saying, "There are 11 of them, and they all carry the same face." The document in Reynolds' hand was a £1,000 Victoria 4% bond, the date of whose issue was 1885. It was shorn of the coupons which had matured. "These bags," continued Goodhart, receiving and returning the bond to its sack, "contain colonial government securities amounting to the value of £11,000, and you will easily understand why I chose to remain a bloated body whilst the sailors stayed on the island." "But why do you carry such things about with you?" said Reynolds, who was not very much affected by the sight of the sacks. Rather disappointed, indeed, for he had looked for something solemn and deep, and not a commonplace exhibition of Stock Exchange securities, in his friend's invitation to follow him into the cave. "All that money might have gone down in the Esmond." "When it was suggested to me to convert the bonds into inscribed stock, I found the difference in price sufficiently great to determine me to keep what I had got. Besides," said Goodhart, with his mild look and gentle smile, "had these bonds foundered with me, I should have been disproving the general belief that a man cannot take his money with him to the grave." He was going to the chest to replace the sacks. "Do you mean to keep them there?" said Reynolds. "Why not?" "Suppose such another crew as yours comes ashore, would to God they would, and we are on the other side of the island, or they catch us napping, and they come to this cave and forthwith open the chest." "Where shall I put them?" said Goodhart, looking round the gloomy interior. "Bury them. This is good dry soil." Reynolds went outside to fetch the shovel, and began to dig a hole in the corner of the cave. "You are right," said Goodhart, "and we never could forget where we had placed them." And whilst Reynolds dug, his friend proceeded, "Plenty of time was allowed us aboard the Esmond. I went below and took off my coat and waistcoat, and put these bags on. They bulked me out, but not in such a way as to excite attention, unless in a customs man, whom I was not afraid of meeting. You noticed probably that I have always bathed in a furtive sort of way. Naturally, I did not desire my satchels to be seen by the sailors. Marine tradition has been enriched by some dark stories founded on sums of money much smaller than the amount you are digging a grave for." "Oh, yes," said Reynolds, manfully plying his shovel and scraping rather than digging into the hard, dry cavern floor. "I should have felt very uncomfortable of a night, or even of a day, to reflect that you were sleeping or going about bulged out with those bonds, if their existence and the value of them had been known to the men. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. I am glad that you did not tell me that you had them upon you. I should have trembled for your safety if by the merest accident the secret had been betrayed to the sailors." When the hole was made, Reynolds went out and cut a quantity of dry grass, with which he lined the grave. Then, putting in the bags, he covered them up with the stuff he had thrown out. "There," said he, with a final appreciative pat with the shovel, "no gem could lie more secret, fathoms deep in rock." They walked into the sunshine and down upon the lovely length of coral foreshore, which they paced. The breaker was curling to them out of the blue water. The sea-bird hovered and glanced, glistened and darkened as it winged about. The morning light lay in glory upon the ocean, and the off-shore breeze was scented with the land. £11,000 is a small sum to represent the savings and labors of 35 years, said Goodhart. "It's more than you would have made as a philosopher," exclaimed Reynolds. "I don't know," answered Goodhart. "There are some professors who are deucedly well paid. I know a man who received $2,000 a year, and a more bigoted coxcomb, insolent in cocksureness, contemptibly venomous in hostility, never led others astray." "What are these professors paid for?" "To lecture, for the most part," answered Goodhart, with his lip taking a slight curl of contempt. "Well, of all vocations," said Reynolds, "I do hold the sea life to be the most beggarly. I mean the merchant sea life. In the Navy you get a pension. You invest your labors, for which the State pays you, and when it is done with you, it sends you a sum annually that may make you easy for life. You shall serve a shipowner for years, honestly, anxiously, most dutifully, and when he is done with you, you go about your business, to the workhouse for all the employer cares." "How are you off?" "Badly." "No savings?" "A few pounds." "Has your wife money?" "A little, but if she had 1,000,000, what good would it be to me?" "It is difficult to meet a man without a relation of some sort," said Goodhart, "but that, as I told you, happens to be my case. Both my parents were only children. I am the sole survivor of my family. I have many acquaintances, but no friends, but I believe I have found a friend." He looked with a smile at Reynolds. "Our association," he continued, "has not been long, but it has given me very great pleasure, and I trust it may not end with our release. There is enough for two up there," he continued, inclining his head in the direction of the cave, "and if I am called first, to whom but to a sufferer who has taught me to respect and admire and like him should I wish it to go?" The pale, worn, and scarred face of Reynolds flushed with emotion, his eyes moistened. The passion of gratitude, and of that sort of love which is born of beautiful feeling, cordial kindness, and sincere sympathy between man and man, ran a trembling through him. "It is not your money, Goodhart," he exclaimed in a low voice, catching his breath with a sharp, hysterical shake of the head. "It is your goodness." He was right in that, for surely it is the smile that sweetens the gift, it is the impulse of which the deed is the fruit, that endears and is best valued by the heart whose purest and most exalted emotions it excites. And it is quite conceivable that two men thrown into each other's company by the adversity of shipwreck should grow so attached that when their deliverance has come about they have chosen to dwell together as brothers. Let us not doubt that such things have happened, for the story of marine peril runs back deep into time. "But do not suppose," said Goodhart, with a little pensiveness in the arch look he put on, "that I flatter myself on being sure of you. Your first act on reaching England will be to inquire after your wife." "To inquire, perhaps, and there an end." "No, you will learn that she is living somewhere, and you'll write to her and entreat her to grant you an interview." "I don't think so." "My dear fellow, the fascination that won you must still be hers. and when you see her the old spell will exert its magic." "Spells are often broken," said Reynolds moodily. Enough had been said on this subject. Goodhart stopped to view the breakers as they curved in caves of liquid blue glass, and broke with summer softness and tropic glory. "It seems to me," said he, "that science is a little too willing to overlook the precedent idea in nature. The ultimate link in the chain of causation is neglected because philosophy is indisposed to discuss the only hook by which it can be hung up. All that we produce in art is the result of antecedent idea, the house, the picture, the statue, the fountain. Without the idea of these things, the things could not be engendered. Now why are we forbidden to witness idea, the divine idea, in what we behold in nature, the tree, the flower, the man? Molecules form themselves into shapes of beauty. I don't claim sentience for these particles of matter, which may be a snowflake, a fibre of color in liquor, a red rose." He smiled as he spoke. "But I claim these formations as the effect of a law which has been preceded by idea. Mind cannot create, it can only perceive," once wrote Charles Lloyd, a remark which deeply impressed the poet Shelley. We perceive the idea in nature, and in our way we produce it as art. As we cannot create, how should we be able to perceive the idea if it were not the antecedent of what we know and study? I think it is Dr. Alcock who expresses surprise that those whose business it is to create should have generally neglected the wonderful examples and perfect models which abound in nature. He tells us that all animated nature is full of hints for perfecting existing mechanical contrivances, and of suggestions for inventions not even thought of. The teredo, or shipworm, inspired Brunet with the plan of tunneling which was employed by him in the Thames Tunnel. And yet science denies idea, and commits itself to a fatuous theory of chance. "I have always held the opinion you express," said Reynolds, "and upon it I have based, as rootedly as a lighthouse upon a rock, my faith in the existence of God." "It is Tyndall that speaks of matter," continued Goodhart after a pause, whilst he gazed at the arching breakers, "as possessed of a power of shaping itself into forms of beauty. It is a gift. Who or what is the giver? Mark the beauty in those arching waters, in the conformation of that rock, in the spout and fall of those cascades, in all that meets the eye. When alum crystallizes, perfect octahedrons are formed. The crystallization of carbonate of lime results in beautiful rhomboids. By crystallizing silica, you get hexagonal prisms, capped at the ends by pyramids, and of course you know that when carbon crystallizes, you get the diamond. Surely all this loveliness must be the effect of the precedent idea reaching its end by laws which proceed from the creative mind. During my stay here," said Reynolds, "I have discovered a flower that smells only by night. It is absolutely scentless when the sun is up. It will not be found at this season. I have wondered what virtue there is in darkness, that puts most things to sleep, to waken life in a flower in the shape of perfume." "You will probably find the phenomenon explained by the law of vibration," answered Goodhart. "Take, for example, the sensation of hearing. If the sound vibrations number less than 16 a second, we are conscious only of the separate shocks. If they exceed 38,000 a second, the ear does not receive the sound. The range of the best ear is said to be about 11 octaves. I suppose the sensation of smell may also be computed in octaves. What the range is I can't imagine, but undoubtedly the vibrations of the flower that is scented by night only are so rapid in sunlight as to exceed the power of consciousness in the sense of smell. Now that I come to think of it," he added, "Humboldt, I believe it is, tells us that from a certain position on the plains of Antaures the sound of the great falls of Orinoco resemble the beating of a surf upon a rocky shore, and is much louder by night than by day." He held this to be due to the sound passing through an atmosphere which frequently changed its density. At night differences of temperature ceased, and sound waves, travelling through homogeneous atmosphere, reached the ear undiminished by reflection. As operations of nature are uniform in their infinite variety, the law that applies to the sound of the great falls may be the law under which comes the flower that is fragrant only at night. I am a little tired. I wish my heart was stronger. They walked slowly in the direction of the dell, and sat down. And now, on this day immediately following the boat's attempt to intercept the ship, it was the destiny of these two men to enter into a spell of waiting and hoping until May 20th, 1892, when came a change, for though it is true that matter is indestructible, it is equally true that things as they are do not last forever. In this time of expectation, and during the course of their constant conversations, it came to be clearly understood between them that if it should please God to call Goodhart away whilst he was on the island, Reynolds must consider himself his heir, and would take possession of the bonds and the property he would find upon the person of his friend. This indeed was obvious and inevitable, because it was not to be supposed that if Reynolds survived Goodhart and was rescued, he would leave £11,000 of securities to rot in a grave in a cave, though had Goodhart owned connections and expressed his wishes, Reynolds was the man to have fulfilled his desires as completely as though Goodhart himself had acted. A true and honest love for each other had penetrated these men's hearts. There was a kinship of nature between them. They were congenial souls, Goodhart the loftier and the more simple, but Reynolds was liberally endowed with those gifts of character which enable a man to adorn life when his means suffer him to occupy a position for their proper display. He would have done well in the Royal Navy. He would have been a popular officer as president of a gun-room mess, or as talker or listener at the ward-room table. He was too good for the merchant service, as, unhappily, it is in these days in the main represented. Goodhart loved Reynolds for the simplicity of his nature, for his habit of thought, for a bouquet or aroma of character which cannot be conveyed by words. He sympathized with the deep, the apparently irreparable sorrow his wife had caused him, and affection is often in close alliance with sympathy. He liked him as a sailor, himself having used the sea for a living. He compassionated his distress as a castaway whose fortune was broken, whose hearth was cold. Indeed, Goodhart was a man in whose soul dwelt a quality of greatness, and his character was exalted by the nobility of his manhood and the possession of those virtues which make men blessed in the eyes of God, and Reynolds would have died for him. In all these dreary, weary, and spirit-quenching weeks, they kept a close lookout for ships' sails and the smoke of funnels, and held in readiness a stock of fuel in the hollow on the hill, ready for the burning glass. But never once did Reynolds catch sight of a ship, and Goodhart, in all that while, 4 times only, 3 sail and 1 trail of smoke, all far in the north, 2 happening in a week, and the others in 3 months, but all at such a distance as to make them of no more good to the poor disconsolate watchers than the sea-fowl that wheeled between. It seemed incredible to Goodhart that no ship should ever approach the island, but for all that he declared again and again that he would sooner take his chance of 3, ay, or even of 5 years' captivity, than have trusted himself in that open boat to intercept a distant ship, with oars only, and a slender store of food and fresh water, and 8 men as there would have been. And again he would say, in varying words, when sunset flushed a desolate bare plain of ocean, and they had stood together looking into the liquid distance till they saw a star, "No matter. It may be but one more night for us to wait. To-morrow may find us on board ship, and how long will it take us to forget this brief detention? How easily we forget the operation we feared we should die under, the quarrel which we thought we should never be able to make up. I am fond of Swift's remark, "It is always too hot or it is always too cold, but somehow or other God Almighty so contrives it that at the end of the year it is all the same." It was fortunate for them that they occupied an island which lies in the temperate latitudes, where there is almost constantly a summer softness in the air, and where even June, which is our December, has no fierceness. The cave was dry and sheltered them well, and the tangle of bushes on either side of the entrance was a good screen when the wind blew into the mouth from the southwest. As the time wore on, Goodhart would often fall into long fits of abstraction, moods of pensive withdrawal from the visible, a deep sinking into himself, with that inward-turned expression of face which betrays the mind that is wandering through the long corridors of memory, lighted by the mystical irradiation which is also memory's. Occasionally he complained of the weakness of his heart, and there was no doubt that the privations he was enduring could not help him to fight this organic trouble. If he mounted a rise for even 20 feet, he would pause to breathe with evident distress, and Reynolds often watched him with deep solicitude. Came the 20th of May, 1892, which is our November. Reynolds awoke and went out of the cave, leaving Goodhart sleeping. The figure of his companion was easily visible to Reynolds, whose sight, fresh from the seals of sleep, found a good light reflected from the radiance outside the cave's mouth. He went about as usual to prepare the cook-pit, taking a look at the sea, but in a sort of hopeless way which was a habit, and would have been most moving to a spectator. And the look he directed was also influenced by the knowledge that unless a ship was hull up and within 2 or 3 miles, she would be invisible to him. He walked down to the creek to fish. This was an inexhaustible source of supply. The fish never seemed to go away. No sooner was the bait sunk than a cod or a salmon-shaped fish, or a fish shaped like a turbot but gloriously adorned, would come up, and Reynolds, as you may suppose, was now an adroit artist in the use of his landing-basket. When he returned he found that Goodhart still remained inside. He cleaned and cut up his fish and lighted his fire, every minute expecting Goodhart to appear. He prepared his shovel with a couple of slices, but before he set his strange pan upon the fire, he thought he would look into the cave. After the necessary pause, he stooped and peered at the sleeper. Goodhart's eyes were partially closed. He was fat in the throat, and when lying, his chin reposed upon its own layers, and prevented the jaw from dropping. Reynolds said softly, "Goodhart," then, "Goodhart," more loudly, then cried his name strongly, taking him by the shoulder and shaking him. The corpse, though often entreated, has never yet responded to the human cry. Not one of the millions since the beginning of things has spoken to tell us what it means and what it has found out. Reynolds took up the dead man's hand. It was as cold as putty, and fell like putty when released. A wild and frightful, heart-cracking sensation of horror and consternation seized the unhappy, lonely, forsaken man. Again alone, how much lonelier now than when he was alone before, he but too surely knew. He reared his figure and gazed at the dead, motionless as a statue. A flood of sorrow overwhelmed his soul. He fell upon his grass couch, and hid his face, and sobbed, and sobbed, and sobbed. He rose again and looked at Goodhart, then ran out into the sunshine, and fell to pacing the ground as though he was mad. Nobody to speak to now, nobody to soothe him with precious and beautiful words of hope. He thinks his heart must break. He will die, and again before his mental vision the picture of his body, supine, a ragged, bearded, rotten, shameless corpse, shaped itself, and his long finger-nails dug themselves into the palms of his hands in the agony of his thoughts. The morning had advanced before the tempest of distress that flashed and groaned in the poor fellow was spent, and then he entered the cave and again looked at Goodhart. Oh yes, he was dead. Death never made a plainer report that it was in possession. He went to the river to drink, and feeling faint with fasting, remade his fire and cooked a piece of fish. What his reflections were you shall readily conceive. Never was the enormous solitude of the island so oppressive. Never did the horizon of the sea seem more remote, never the prospect of release more hopeless. He would go mad. Those birds uttering cries like the creaking of strained timber in a seaway, the melancholy, monotonous roar of surf, the eternity of the dwarf trees, of the falling cascades, of those circling winged shapes, of that sliding, burning eye of sun, these things must, by endless iteration, drive the reason out of his skull. In the afternoon he went about to dig a grave. He was slow, because he could not ply the shovel as though it were a spade. He chose the centre of the dell for a resting place for his friend, as the soil was more easily dug up in this part than elsewhere. It is hard to imagine a more pathetic figure than this poor man made, bearded, pale, and ragged, alone, surveyed now and again by a circling sea-bird, digging a hole in which to secrete the remains of a man he had learnt to love. He had finished his sad task by sunset, but not before. He made his way by the twilight to the river to drink, and came back to eat the remains of his cooked fish, and that night he slept in the old fissure, his bed-place of 7 months. He was very low and nervous, distracted by the grief occasioned by his loss, subdued into a sense of dumb, aching suspense, which was a sort of hysteria proper to raise a ghost again to pace the dell, and he could not bring himself to lie in the cave with the dead body. He obtained some rest in the night, and after attending his needs in the morning, he proceeded with the task of burying Goodhart. Nothing could be more painful to him than the idea of despoiling the body of its property, removing the clothes, and dragging the dead to its burial place. But all this had to be done. Reynolds possessed the strictest title to all that Goodhart had left. The man who was dead had never named a relative. He had, indeed, stated again and again that he was as much alone in the world as Reynolds on his island. So that, his being dead, his bonds and belongings were as much Reynolds' as if they had been willed to him, or as if he had preceded Reynolds in his lonely occupation of the island, and left his bonds and property to be taken by the first who was lucky enough to find them. Reynolds found these things in the dead man's pockets: a very handsome gold watch and chain, to which was attached a spade guinea and a small revolving seal, bearing his wife's initials on one side and his own on the other. A handsome Russia leather pocket-book, the contents of which he did not then examine, but which he afterwards found to hold 4 Bank of England notes of £50 each, 8 of £10 each, and 5 of £5. Also 4 letters from his wife, one containing a lock of her hair. These he would have buried with the body if he had thought of inspecting the contents of the pocket-book before the interment, but he was too much worried, affected. He was grieving too much over his loss and the sorrowful task imposed upon him to think of examining the value of his poor friend's pocket possessions. He also found an elaborate knife, full of useful blades and tools, a gold pencil case, a purse containing some sovereigns and silver, a gold toothpick, and a silver matchbox. He put these things in the chest for the present, as his clothes were little more than rags which hung upon him like wet weed on a rock, and his pockets broken and useless, and then removed the coat, waistcoat, and trousers. This done, with trembling hands and a sobbing heart, he gently and reverentially dragged the body down the slope to the grave he had dug, and after lining the trench with grass, with most pious hands he contrived to let the corpse slide into the grave, where it rested on its back, looking with sweet expression in death up to that God whom in life he had adored. With him was buried his wife's wedding ring and the ring he wore on his forefinger. Reynolds next covered the body with grass and leaves, and when this was done he knelt and pronounced aloud these simple words: "Father, receive him, and do not forsake me." He arose and began to shovel in the earth, haunted by this reflection: "If I die here, who will bury me?" And he shuddered again and again to the loathsome image that held aghast the vision of his mind. The hours passed in this melancholy work, and in the afternoon he had heaped up a sight-catching grave, which he resolved to memorialize. So next day with the axe he had hewed down a stout bough and made a cross out of it, and in the next 2 or 3 days, during the intervals of providing for his own necessities, he cut these words: "John Goodhart, died May 20, 1892, buried by his loving friend and mourner, Francis Reynolds. Lord have mercy upon us." The letters were small, for the split surface on which they were traced was narrow, but they were cut deep and well. He was something of an artist with a knife, and in Goodhart's he had a good tool. He could carve model sailing ships, make toy chests of drawers and doll-houses, and had been chased and caned more than once in his youth for cutting his name in church sittings, school desks, park seats, and the like. He was once again alone, lonelier than when he was formerly alone, lonelier by virtue of the knowledge he had gained that ships might pass and he would not see them unless they came close in. End of Chapter 10.